had said all the horses are remarkably better in the arena. And the training hadn't overlapped yet. I had nothing to do with her under saddle work at that early stages. And she had nothing to do with what I was doing at the early stages. But those two were improving. So that became where I remember John saying, you teach them whatever you want, just makes them better athletes. Teach them to stand on your heads if you want, I don't care. And so every horse that came through those doors got bridge conditioning, target training. That's all there was to it. So it was this horse's time to get, Husker was his name, to get him bridge condition target trained. We went up to a show in Attitash, and that's where I taught him. So in the show tent, you know, in his stalls, he got the 3 5-minute sessions a day of the clicker, 3 5-minute sessions a day of the target. And then it's months later, we're back at Casanova, and he is in the paddock. But what's going on is when the grooms would go to get him, he'd flag his tail and run away like a giant Arabian. And then you go, and he's a warm blood. And then so they would leave, like, okay, I guess we're leaving. And then he'd come running to the gate, like, don't leave me. And you go, okay. And then and it just went on and on and on, and until it was like 5 hours, and nobody could get him, nobody could catch him. And it was the end of the day. And by now I'm not living on the farm. So I was in the car actually, and Vinton was somewhere else that weekend or week. So I thought, well, I did know the target. Now keep in mind, with the marine mammals, you never took a break. They knew they got bridge conditioning, target training, and it continued the rest of their life. Well, this had been months since he'd seen the bridge condition or seen the clicker or target. But there was enough horses that there are other things we were working on. So we didn't really follow through with anything else with him because he didn't have a lot to do. But everybody got it, and everybody had a foundation in case we needed to go somewhere with it. So we go. I thought, he did have a target. I don't know what he'd do with that. And so I go into the grooms and said, okay, you guys, we did do the target. And they said, well, we hasn't seen it in months. We've never done it here at the farm. And besides, we've tried buckets of grain and carrots, and the food's not doing it. So I don't really think it's going to work. And I said, but we have nothing left to lose. That's that science person to me. And I was like, well, we have nothing left to lose. They're like, yeah, okay. So I grabbed my clicker and my target, and I imagine they all probably were like, as I walk out with my things, and I go up to the gate or go up to the fence, actually. I kind of came from the side. And as I walked up, he flagged his tail and ran away. But I also knew what they said, as soon as you turn your back, he runs back to you. And you always want to click on what you want to see more of. So you're drawing attention to the behavior you want to see more of. So I turned my back like I'm going to walk away, and I see him come running towards me. So I click. And I turn around. You can see him like 20 feet away. And so now he's frozen. He's not moving, but he's not running. So I'm like, this is better. And I put the target over the fence. He dropped his head. He walked up like normal, touched the target, walked up near the gate. We walked home. No big deal. Now, I had to kind of go, here's your horse. I mean, I didn't know what that was about. I had no idea what that was about. And I just thought, but here he is. So, but what struck me, whatever had him over his fear threshold for 5 hours, food wasn't going to get over, his familiar people weren't going to break through, the clicker and the target broke through to that. And not only did it bring him back down, he didn't come to the gate sketchy and nervous. He walked to the gate like normal. He's like, oh, okay. And he walked to the gate and he walked home just like he always does. So it was interesting that he was so far over threshold, couldn't get out of it, was stuck in that mental state, and all of a sudden he was all the way back down to, I'm just the guy I used to be yesterday. So and so I didn't know what to make of that. But I do know really partly what was behind it. It was the classic conditioning. So now, and there's a neurologic side that I'm going to talk about behind it, but it cut through all that noise and brought him down to a comfortable place where he could think and he could process. Now, one of the things that we have learned about is neurobiology and neuroscience are now coming up behind psychology. And so psychology forever has been considered a soft science, because while we may be able to do clinical trials and studies, we can't say definitively this is what's happening in the body. We can say this tends to produce these results. So it was a soft science. Well, now neurobiology is coming behind it, and they're proving what is going on in the brain, what part of the brain's being used, when they use, when's that spike, when does that go. endorphins, and so we're finding out so much more. Well, one of the things they found out, one of the people that is, there's two people I quite like. One is somebody named Jaak Panksepp, Jaakpanksepp. Jaak Panksepp is one. The other is Dr. Robert Sapolsky out of Stanford, and they're both people that I really enjoy listening to. Robert Sapolsky, Panksepp died young, not that long ago, but Sapolsky is, Jesse listened to him and said, oh, he's a funny professor. Because he is. But one of the things that neurobiologists of their ilk have found is that when we utilize, and this is now because of the hard science behind it, where they could test what's going on, they found that when we tend to use different types of training, it tends to light up different parts of the brain. So when we tend to use traditional training, it tends to light up a part of the brain responsible for fight or flight. When we use positive reinforcement, it tends to light up a part of the brain referred to as the seeking system. So this is seeking things they like, things they want, things they desire. Well, what happens in these two different parts of the brain? Different chemicals are also produced in these different parts of the brains. One is a chemical that results in cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and that is in the fight or flight part of the brain. In the seeking system, tends to produce more endorphins and dopamines and things they like. It's feel-good things and things they want because they're seeking things they like and want. So that right there is a very interesting thing. And what happens typically is when they learn a behavior, what emotions are part of that early learning experience tends to come forward when they reproduce that behavior. So now, if it's learned with cortisol and stress hormones, those feelings like ruh-roh, whew, I got in the trailer, or whatever it might be. When it's endorphins and dopamines, they're like, I love the trailer, and so now we have a different experience and we have a different lasting, it doesn't mean we can't change them, but those hormones that are part of that become part of their experience and their present day sense. And what I realized is what I suspect went on with Husker Du. He was like cortisol was flowing through his brain for whatever. Clearly something happened that triggered him into that. So we just don't know what it was. But the target and the clicker brought him back down to endorphins and dopamines, and it overrode what had him lit up and over his fear threshold. So I think it's important that we get to that place, and that it was the classic conditioning that goes on behind the target. So it wasn't the target itself. The target isn't magic. It was the classic conditioning, that repetition of doing the target with the endorphins and dopamines that brought it flooding forward. Does that make sense to everybody? So this is why I look at that. When I first it took me a while to process that, because we didn't know the concept of, we didn't have the neurobiology behind it to tell me this is exactly what's going on. But then when I did get it and I started processing through it, I realized it's the classic conditioning. The classic conditioning now is one of my best friends. I want classic conditioning. I want to get there. I want endorphins and dopamines flooding when they see me. I want them to go, oh, woo, it's my woman, or whatever. I want them to feel that way. I want them to go, the trailer, I love the trailer. Trailer is a safe, good place for me to be. So the target starts to represent safety and good things. And so that's where I recognize that to be happening. Also, what happened is one time then, Mint and George were two young